Hi, my name is Jillian Booth. I'm the curator of academic and community programs here at the University of Victoria Legacy Art Galleries. We're in the gallery downtown right now, and I would just like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and very grateful for the impeccable care of the land that they have undertaken for a time immemorial. And really also grateful to be here, working and living and talking to you about our current exhibition. So we thank the Lekwungen people and thank you for being here. Today we're going to be looking at an exhibition called To Fish as Formerly, which is about the revitalization of the SWOLE, which is the SÁNEĆ Reef Net Fishery. So the exhibition talks about the history of the SWOLE, the eco-cultural resurgence of the SÁNEĆ people through the revitalization of the SWOLE, and we also are going to be looking at contemporary artists who are exploring learnings that they've undertaken when they've been looking at the reef net. This exhibition was co-curated by Chief Nick Claxton of the Sayout Nation, who did his PhD dissertation on the land-based healing and education related to the reef net, and Katie Hughes, who is a recent graduate of UVic Public History. One of the things that Nick pointed out that's very important to this exhibition, but also to land-based healing and cultural resurgence, is language revitalization. The WSÁNEĆ are working hard to revitalize SINTEN. And what Nick was saying was that the language is completely place-based. So most, if not all, of the words are specific to this place. He gave an example of the word for ocean has the word orca in it. So whenever they talk about the ocean, they're considering the orca, they're considering that it's the orca's homeland, and when they cross the ocean, they make a prayer to the ocean, which is actually a prayer to the orca, and it's like a land acknowledgement. It's saying, yes, I'm coming through your territory. Now we're going to start the tour with a video in the exhibition that recorded some of the process of that first fishing trip that the WSÁNEĆ took with Nick, and some of the ceremony that goes along with them. I'm starting the tour with that because you'll see that the video starts with Nick's voice, and I think it's very important that be the tone that starts the tour, and that we remember that this story is a WSÁNEĆ story. It's not a legacy gallery story, and it's not my story. The video will focus on very much how the reef net brings people together.
I said my name's Colton, and I come from the Sayout community, and I'm from the Salish nation. My work has been focused on revitalizing the traditional knowledge system and practice of the SÁNEĆ Reef Net Fishery. And that was something that was wrongfully taken away from us probably a century ago. There are only a few last remaining reef net fishermen in my community. They're elders. So I've been really focused on trying to get this back to the community.
Okay, it's got to be lifted up a bit in the front here.
Reef net fishing it's a fishing technology that was given to us by, we believe, by the Creator and by the salmon people. The reef net did two things. It distinguished our people as a nation because we were the only people, the Straits Salish people were the only ones who had this reef net fishing technology. But it also brought us together as a nation. We're known as the SÁNEĆ people, and some people call us the saltwater people, because if you look at our traditional territory, it's just as much marine environment as it is land. So our territory is really water. The Douglas Treaty was, in our oral history, not necessarily a treaty in terms of how mainstream Canada thinks of a treaty as a land cession treaty. We feel it was more of a recognition of our nationhood and more of an agreement between two nations of people. One of the things that the Douglas Treaty says is that we're allowed to carry on our fisheries as formerly. Quite often you would hear our elders talk about the reef net as the princess of the tides. Just as women and females create life and give life, so does the reef net. It gives us life.
We're almost ready to set
Very
this.
exciting.
I'm like ready to put this on. Nick, you gotta watch this.
We're reef netting again. So it's a stationary technology. It's anchored. The lead is anchored. The canoes are anchored, and the net is suspended in the water between those canoes. And it took a lot of knowledge of where the salmon would migrate, as well as the knowledge of the flow of the tides. That reef net fishery formed the core of our society at that time. It was the way we governed ourselves. It was the core of our spiritual society, core of our economic system, social system. It was really the backbone of our people. One of the things that my uncle said along this journey is he said, "I hear you want to bring the reef net fishery back." And I said, "Yeah, I do. You can't just go out and go fishing," he said. "You need to do it through ceremony first." So I've been working with the children in our local community school. We started to build this model net together. In that way, we learned together about the beliefs and the philosophies around this net. And it even became a centerpiece of the whole school year, where the teachers in the school, the socials teachers and the science teachers, started to teach their subject around this project. In that sense, it was kind of bringing back the reef net as a backbone of our education system. It's my vision, all of our vision, that we can all be reef net fishing people again.
The video was made as part of Nick's PhD dissertation when he and the WSÁNEĆ people reef net fished for the first time in a very long time. And as you can see, we see them acknowledging a really deep relationship with the salmon and the ocean, and how the practice of the reef net is a backbone of their community, including the social, economic, political, and spiritual beliefs and systems that they had. The other interesting part of the video, and that Nick finds really important, is this idea that the reef net can be also the backbone to their education system, and that it is currently being used in the tribal school to teach the students not only social studies and sciences and math, but also the belief systems and full history of their community. Now we're looking at these three photos. We're going to look at some historical images of what the reef net looked like. These photos are from the 1930s, and as you saw in the video, or you heard in the video, in Canada the reef net fishing was banned, but in the United States they were able to carry on and reef net fish. So this is the Lummi people who live in Washington State in the 1930s. The title of the exhibition actually comes from the Douglas Treaties of 1852, which stated that the WSÁNEĆ would be able to fish as formerly. However, the Shwala was systematically reduced by colonial systems for the next 50 years and finally banned altogether in Canada in the 19th century. So here we see the Lummi people setting the net, bringing the canoes together and bringing the fish out of the water. What's interesting about the Shwala is that it's unique to the Straits Salish peoples. The thing is, they had no salmon-bearing rivers. There's no salmon-bearing rivers in the Straits area. So they had to master sophisticated reef net technology, which they needed to have a really deep understanding of the salmon and of the ocean, and the migration routes and the natural systems that happened in the oceans. The reef nets were set to intercept the salmon on their return to the spawning grounds in rivers like the Fraser River. So the communities that had the knowledge were all Straits Salish communities and only Straits Salish communities. So there's nowhere else in the world, nowhere else in British Columbia or in Canada that this technology is used. It's the Lekwungen people, the Songhees people, the Esquimalt, Beecher Bay, Tsuk, Malahat, Semiahmoo, Lummi, and WSÁNEĆ people all did the reef net fishery. The reef net fishery was more than a technology. It was the basis for a way of life for the Straits Salish peoples, including belief systems, seasonal practices, and spiritual practices, with much ceremony. As Nick said in his video, his elders said, you can't do the reef net without doing ceremony. And the ceremony emphasized the deep relationship the WSÁNEĆ people had with the natural world, specifically the salmon. So a couple of examples of, this is an image of the Lummi people again in ceremony related to the reef net. This is a ceremonial reef net model that they have with them. And even before the net was made, the actual fishing net, there were prayers during the harvest of the willow bark to make the net. The spiritual protector in the community called the salmon at the beginning of the summer in a ceremony that included prayer, singing, and thanking the sights, the islands, the winds, and the salmon. There was ceremony when they placed the anchor stones to hold the net down in the water. And at the end of the season, there was a ceremony where children would participate in a ritual of feeding each reef net site. So as you can see, and as Nick has stated, it was more than a technology. It was a whole belief system and way of life. It was the basis of the WSÁNEĆ way of life. Now we're going to look at a sculpture by John Elliott. Nick Claxton says that in the WSÁNEĆ worldview, the land doesn't belong to them, that they belong to the land, and that they care for the land and have a deep respect and relationship with the land. Nick Claxton is a reef net captain, and here we have a reef net captain pole that John Elliott carved. John Elliott is WSÁNEĆ, an educator and a SINTEN language speaker. The pole tells the story of the human spirit who gifted the Shwala to the WSÁNEĆ people. The eagle on top shows the strength and qualities of a good fisher, so good eyesight, quick to respond, accurate. And below that, we see the captain, the reef net captain, holding a net and ropes here and net weights. So these net weights are really interesting, big stones with holes through them. And below that is the face of a WSÁNEĆ relative in an anchor stone. She went to live with the salmon in exchange for the knowledge of the reef net. So the reef net captain is a key person in the canoe, in their fishing canoe, and in the community. He watches for signs of the salmon coming, and then signals when to close the net, where to set the net, and when to close the net. And he is responsible for the reef net sites. So the sites are passed down through families, and the captain is responsible for taking care of the site and maintaining the right to fish. The captain would lead the team in fishing and was also responsible for sharing the catch among the community. A key part of the practice of reef net fishing was ecological conservation. The Salish people respected the salmon, and so they included ways for the salmon to thrive while they were also fishing and catching them. So this piece here that we're looking at is by Temoseng Chasz Elliott, who is an emerging WSÁNEĆ artist and also the nephew of John Elliott, who carved the pole. This piece is called Salish, and that means life. The Salish is a hole that's designed right into the net, and you'll see this here. Chasz has decided to highlight the Salish, and that Salish is meant to allow salmon to escape while some are being caught. So here you see one of the bigger salmon escaping from the Salish, and then in the background, you may not be able to see it, but there are other salmon caught in the net. It was really important for Chasz to work in community for this piece, and so he invited his family to tell him what they know about the reef net and to learn alongside him about the reef net. And together, they helped him make the twine for this net. They needed to gather the willow, and just to make this small section of net, they needed to make 64 feet of twine from willow. So you can imagine how much work it would take to make a full-size net. Another act of conservation that was part of the practice of the SWOLE was when the largest salmon, or the king salmon, was caught. They shut down the fishery for 3 days and would take a rest, and that would give the salmon an opportunity to return to the spawning grounds, to pass through the net or the netting, the spawning area, and return to the spawning grounds. So once again, ensuring that there would be salmon available for the following year. It was interesting approaching and working with the emerging artists, the WSÁNEĆ artists, about this exhibition and about the reef net, because for them too it was an opportunity to learn about their culture and to be actively involved in the ecocultural revitalization and resurgence of their community. This piece is by Sarah Jim, and she's a WSÁNEĆ artist, and she calls this Moontide. She calls it Moontide because the WSÁNEĆ people are deeply connected to the tides, and the WSÁNEĆ calendar is a 13-moon calendar. They don't go on a 12-month calendar. It's a 13-moon calendar. So she was thinking about that and how that impacts, that the moon calendar impacts the seasons, and the seasons impact the fishery. There are 4 salmon in the 13-moon calendar, and you see the 4 salmon here. So in this piece, once again, you see the Salish in the middle. You'll see the reef net and the 4 salmon. You see the Coast Salish design elements, the trigon, the crescent, a little bit of an oval here and a circle in the middle. You see the net and these net weights out here again with the hole in them. And then the interesting thing with this piece that she's highlighted is the eelgrass here. So the eelgrass was actually attached to the net to make the salmon feel comfortable and to kind of trick them into the net, into thinking that they're actually on the bottom of the ocean. So pretty interesting and creative and almost artistic part of the technology of the making of it. And the other part with this piece is that Sarah's really interested or taken by the fact that she wanted this to be from the salmon's perspective. So the salmon is swimming into the net and up toward the paler part, up toward the light at the top of the ocean. It's a view from the salmon's perspective. Sarah works at Sneedquith, which is Todd Inlet on WSÁNEĆ territory, and she works on ecological restoration projects, and she is a SINÄTEN speaker and works at the Lekwungen Tribal School as well as being an artist. Indigenous Resurgence isn't something that is just started happening. It's been happening for a long time, ever since the potlatch ban and the ban on the reef net. The WSÁNEĆ people and all Indigenous people have been working to rebuild their communities and their cultures. Here we see the SANEĆ Indian Territorial Declaration, and the 4 bands that make up the WSÁNEĆ Nation, the Pakwachin, Sartlip, Sayout, and Saykum bands, all the chiefs of all those bands came together and made this declaration. And it was a response to the Douglas treaties. And it says that they do not recognize any past efforts to separate them from their land. The treaties were treaties of peaceful coexistence, and this did not involve the sale of the rights to the land. Their sacred connection to the land is what establishes their territorial title. So here we have a whole wall dedicated to the Douglas treaties. And so I'll just give you a little bit of a brief history. From 1850 to 1854, James Douglas, as part of the Hudson Bay Company, met with the Indigenous people of this place and arranged 14 treaties. They were oral agreements, so they weren't written originally, and they were seen by the settlers as land purchases. The First Nations, though, saw them as agreements of peaceful coexistence, as they said in the SANEČ Declaration. There were translators present, but clearly there was meaning missed and worldviews were coming together. They didn't understand each other's relationships to the land and each other's understanding of ownership of land and, relationship to land. So later the treaties were written down, stating that the land belonged solely to the white people, but the First Nations could fish as formerly. So not only were the treaties kind of misunderstood in the beginning, but while the WSÁNEĆ people were able to fish for a while as formerly, within 50 years, the colonial government banned the fishery, and Indigenous people were not allowed to get fishing licenses. So it was only the settler commercial fishermen that were allowed to fish. This piece on the mezzanine is called Network. It's by Dylan Thomas, who is the City of Victoria Indigenous Artist in Residence. And he made this piece in 2018. His interest in the reef net was this idea that it takes a lot of trust and collaboration for a team of fishers to be successful. Not only is there trust and collaboration within the team, but there's also trust and collaboration between nations. So the nations had to communicate about their technology, their understandings, their reef net sites. They had to share together. And his design symbolizes this necessity for honest cooperation. In Dylan's artist statement about this piece, he talks about the practice of honest cooperation being essential to a path to reconciliation and Indigenous resurgence. So in the piece, you can see the salmon are all interlocked, and so I see that as his way of illustrating what it is like to work together, for the people to be connected, for the salmon to be connected, and for the people and the salmon to be connected together. And that's one of the things that one of the key principles of the reef net that Nick iterates every time I talk to him, is that the reef net brings people together. Okay, so this is the final piece that we're going to be looking at today, and it's by Colton, who is a non-Indigenous artist. It's called Pulse of the Salish Sea. And so he's interested in using scientific information, scientific data, and bringing it together with traditional Indigenous knowledge to support each other. So here he's got a map of an interactive map of the Salish Sea. So the territory of the Straits Salish people, where they did their reef net fishery. In the top section there you'll see Greater Vancouver. And then in the lower section it's the Gulf Islands, and to the south of that, Swartz Bay. Colton used 30 years of salmon run data, data of currents, data of weather, and then development data to build this piece. And when I was thinking about it, I'm an artist as well. I went through a visual art degree, and I was like, what is he doing with all this data? And then I realized that when I take the ferry from Swartz Bay to TEMOSEN, you know, I'll enjoy myself. I might notice that it's raining or it's sunny, and you know, I might hope that I see a whale or count some eagles. But I don't really get a deep sense of this space. But if I were a reef net fisher and I had been fishing here for 30 years, I would hold a lived experience of 30 years of salmon runs, 30 years of weather data, and I would watch the development. I would watch the development of this space. And so I think that that's what Colton's getting at, is how can we use scientific data to uphold the experience of Indigenous people? I'd like to thank Nick Claxton and the WSÁNEĆ people for sharing their stories of the reef net, to the artists in the exhibition for interpreting knowledge and understanding of the reef net, and to Katie Hughes for making this exhibition happen.